All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the first podcast of the Neuengamme generations. My name is Tom de Vos, I'm from Belgium, and here to introduce you Miss Svenja Ganso-Vrouwald, President from the Young Committee.
Hello.
Miss Francie Henning from the Archive of Neuengamme.
Hello, everybody.
Miss Anna Buka, educator at Neuengamme.
Hi.
And our special guest today, Alexander Bancic from Croatia.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to see everyone. We are meeting digital today. What is the date again? March 6th already for the first podcast. We're doing it digital because everybody is in different countries, of course. I'm in Belgium, but we have people from Germany, we have people from Croatia, so it's nice to get everybody together on this wonderful sunny day. How is everyone feeling today?
Great.
Very good. Thank you, Tom.
All right. So this is the first in hopefully what will become a series of podcasts about subcamps of Neuengamme. And it's nice that we're all here today because we all have a bit of a special link, I think, with Neuengamme. Me, myself, I am the great-grandson of a former inmate of the main camp of Neuengamme. But I think for everybody they have link. Maybe we can just give a short introduction. Maybe Svenja, you as our president.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I am the granddaughter of two survivors of satellite camps of the Neuengamme camp.
All right. And Francie?
Well, I am the great-granddaughter of a persecuted social democrat who was not in Neuengamme concentration camp, but in Fuhlsbüttel, which is like a prison part-time concentration camp in Hamburg. And well, now I work in Neuengamme, so that's probably the biggest link.
All right, great.
Yeah.
And Anna,
And
work
you are
in,
our public relations officer for the Young Committee. Don't forget that.
Yeah, I always tend to forget.
Yeah, she's the one doing all the work, actually. We're just here for the show. Yeah. Okay, and Anna, you work at Neuengamme as well, right?
Yes, I work in Neuengamme as an educator, let's put it that way, to describe all my different tasks and kinds of work I do. And but I do not have any personal connections to Neuengamme.
Okay.
I started as a volunteer and then stayed, basically.
Okay, so now you're living in Germany for a few years already, but originally you're from Bosnia.
Exactly. I grew up and lived my whole life in Bosnia prior to that. And I guess maybe this is a little bit where this personal connection or personal interest in this kind of history comes from, post-war conflicts and so.
Indeed, correct. And that's why we'd love to invite you today because you will have a lot of interesting to say about Spaldingstraße as well, of course. And Bosnia is not that far from Croatia as well.
Indeed.
Okay, so that's where Alexander comes in. Hello, Alexander.
Hello. Yeah, I'm the grandson of an inmate of Neuengamme.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And he was in Spaldingstraße as well, then?
He was in Spaldingstraße, yeah.
Okay, so you're also a descendant indeed. And in real life, I was told you are a drama teacher.
Yes.
What about that?
I'm a drama teacher. I work in the local theater for 25 years, working with children and young people doing theater.
Okay, so nice.
Yeah.
All right, good. So let's get started. So the main topic of today is, of course, the subcamp Spaldingstraße, which is located in Hamburg, actually not that far from the main camp of Neuengamme. And maybe we can just start off with a bit of an introduction about what was going on in the satellite camps, because it's the first time, of course. I think it's relevant that we talk about it, how this kind of work. Can maybe Anna, you give us an introduction about how does this thing work or used to work?
Well, the concentration camp on Spaldingstraße was sub-camp, as you said, or a satellite camp, as I'm probably going to be saying, of the Neuengamme concentration camp. And the satellite camps were a phenomenon that developed later on, like in the last few years of the war. Namely, from 1942, there was an increasing demand for concentration camp prisoners' labor from the Ministry of Armaments, German Ministry of Armaments, and the German armaments industry. And this prompted the establishment of a large number of satellite camps near factories and construction sites and wherever else the prisoners' labor was needed. And most of them were established actually in the last year of the war. So by 1945, when the war ended, Neuengamme had more than 85 satellite camps in the city of Hamburg, but also all over northern Germany. And if we look at Spaldingstraße in particular, this camp was established in November 1944. And
that's quite late already then. That's quite late in wartime.
Indeed. I mean, most of these camps, as I said, were established late, so in the last year of the war, but this one particularly late, and it only existed over the winter, which also contributed to the horrible conditions that prisoners had to live under in this camp. And it was established in the part of the city called Hamburg, which was a restricted area at the time, meaning it was almost completely destroyed in the Allied air raids in the summer of 1943.
Yeah,
and
that was a big
prisoners
thing, right?
were...
That was a big thing, the Allied bombings. Hamburg was bombed during the last year of the war significantly, yeah? Nothing...
Yeah. There was a huge or most significant, let's put it that way, air raid or series of air raids in the summer of 1943 that is known as Gomorrah, and where parts of the city were almost obliterated from the face of the earth. And Hamburg, this part of the city that I just mentioned, was one of them. So the SS decided to house prisoners there in one of the few remaining buildings. It was a 7-story former tobacco warehouse, and this is where they were housed.
Okay. I've been to a museum in the Hamburg city center a few time ago about Gomorrah. It was in the former Nikolaikirche, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly the exhibition that deals with that particular topic.
Okay, maybe that's good to add it in the show notes because it's really worth visiting. Because in the basement there's the museum, and then on the top of the tower it's a burned out church in Hamburg, and you can still have a look on the skyline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And so then Spaldingstraße is not really far from the city center there then.
No, I mean, it's not right around the corner, but it's not far from there. Okay. Exactly.
And it's a place that you can still visit today, or?
Yes and no. I mean, you can visit the place, but of course it's very different from what it used to be. Today it is basically a hostel, and
so one could
it
spend
is
the
not
night.
the kind of memorial that you would expect to see there. Okay. It's not, it's just a little tiny exhibition.
Okay, good to know. And so we were at the history part in November 44 when the camp was founded.
Mm-hmm.
What was the goal then of why was it founded? Do you know that?
Well, most of these camps were established in order to have prisoners clear rubbles, recover dead bodies, dismantle unexploded ordnance without any safety provisions or shelter, needless to say. And Spaldingstraße was one of them as well. So this is a kind of work that prisoners did in this camp. They also worked for the Reichsbahn, which is the German national railway, and they had to repair basically bombed out railroad tracks.
Okay, and so Alexander, if I understand correctly, your grandfather was one of these inmates then?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, he was in Spaldingstraße, and listening to Anna now, Maybe the reason is because he was blacksmith, so maybe he was doing this repairs of the railroad or something.
Okay. Oh, yeah. And how do you get from Croatia into Germany during wartime then?
Unfortunately, very easily. My grandfather was a member of the Liberation Committee in his town in Savicenta in central Istria, and he was, as I always say, he was not a partisan, because the partisans were in in the woods. There were like fighters with weapons, and my grandfather was not part of the partisans, but he was still living in the town with his family, but doing some special operations which included propaganda and maybe diversions and some kind of this kind of work. I don't have so many information about this, just a couple of them. So I don't know really what he was doing, but he was always in danger
Mm-hmm.
because he was living in the town. And one day, as I heard, a woman from the town betrayed him and also all the other parts of the Liberation Committee, and the German soldiers came for him.
Okay, and when was this then? Was it?
It was in August 44.
Wow. Okay.
15 of August. And it's interesting. I found afterwards that all the members of the committee were taken the same day.
Okay. And how was it in wartime Croatia? Because I, of course, have more info about my country of Belgium, what happened during the liberation part of the war. But was it close to liberation itself then? Or how was the occupation during wartime?
Well, it's interesting because Istria was at that time part of Italy.
Okay.
And as we know, Italy, the fascist regime collapsed in 43. So only at that time, really, the war started in that part of Europe. In the resistance, the sorry, the big operations of the resistance just started in 43. So August 44, it was not so much into the liberation still.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who liberated Croatia then? Or Istria?
So the Yugoslav army, the partisans.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when was the liberation then?
In May 45.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's late. And when was your grandfather deported?
My grandfather, so he was imprisoned in August 44, and then as they told me, he was transferred to Poreč, which is a town on the coast of Istria,
Mm-hmm.
then to Trieste, and from Trieste to Dachau camp.
Okay.
In September. I think September 25, I think. And then from there, not sure which date was, but he was transferred to Hamburg and Neuengamme.
I can later tell you which date I have.
Yeah,
all the documents here.
thank you.
Oh, that's
I
very
have
interesting,
somewhere,
actually.
but I didn't remember.
So,
That's
Francie,
fine.
you did
That's why I'm
research?
here.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did research at the archives then, Francie, about the grandfather of Alexander?
I did, yes.
Okay, now I'm curious about the actual date, to be honest.
Should I say it now? Well, he arrived at Dachau at the 25th September 1944, and was there until the 22nd October 1944. So just a very short amount of time until he got to Neuengamme and then later died at Spaldingstraße.
Okay, that's interesting to know. And just now I'm curious, how can you find it in the archives? Because you have so much material. How can you find it so fast?
Fast? Okay, and much material. Oh, good that you say that. Well, we have a database and we have some material. We do not have much material. I think we planned it on a different place in our podcast, but I can already say that most of the original documentation from the concentration camp was burned at the end of the war. It was destroyed by the SS because they wanted to cover up their crimes. Obviously, they know that they did wrong. And, well, we do not have much, but we have some original documents, and especially of documents of the persons who died before the really end of the war. We can track at least their death very well. We have the death books of the camp infirmary, for example, and we have the death certificates that have been made after these dates.
Okay,
Yeah.
and this is then part of most of the research that you're still doing today, more than almost 80 years after it happened.
Yeah, we still try to fix the holes in our documentation and get new information every day. I think since now, in the last couple of months, I have discovered 2 new names of prisoners, which is great, I think, because it was more like a coincidence. Their relatives get in touch with us, and they had like their arrival and their prisoner number because they had letters sent home, and we just had the number but not the name because they survived. So yeah, because they got in touch with us, we now have a name connected with the number, and that is great.
Okay, and that's how you found then the information about what's the name of your grandfather, Alexander?
Josip. Josip is the Croatian name, and Giuseppe is the Italian name.
Okay.
Because he died as an Italian.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was actually the name in our archives are quite diverse. And the name of Giuseppe Bancic as well. We have, I think, 3 or 4 different kind of spelling in our documents. And we do not have much documents. I think I found, I would have to open now my database, but maybe I think I found about 4 documents from him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all. And all of them are written with different names.
Yeah.
But yeah, our database is quite intelligent, and I am capable to filter out.
So then Istria is a very, very peculiar region then during wartime, because first it was in Italy, it was not occupied, and then after Italy fell, it was occupied. And then after the war, a lot of change. Maybe it's good to zoom in about Istria for a minute. What do you think? I'm curious.
I think that's actually a really good idea, because when I got to know Alexander and his story, I must admit, and it might be typical for many people having grown up in Germany, I didn't know a whole lot about the region. It definitely not during the time of World War II, and it made me curious that, and this might be something Alexander will tell us about later, that, for example, the grave of your grandfather is also in the Ehrenanlage for Italian prisoners in Hamburg. So that's special too. So I started doing a little bit of reading, and here I'm definitely inviting you, Alexander, to correct me, because I just did reading, I didn't do a bunch of research, is that Istria has had a very a changing history. I mean, when I look at the last maybe 200 years, different countries or empires ruling the area, and a diversity of people or languages speaking in that region. There was the Austro-Hungarian rule up to the end of World War One, and which was then followed by that period of Italian rule, and what I found very important in regard to your grandpa's story was it was a period not just of Italian rule, but they tried to Italianize the people. I mean, people were no longer allowed to speak Croatian or to have their culture exhibited in museums, and that must have been really terrible. And it was the period when your grandpa was growing up. If I remember correctly, he was born in 1910. Is that true, Alexander?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, and then to have to Italianize their names, as you said, that really must do something to a people. And I, at the same time, from talking to you earlier, I think people in that region still have a close connection to the Italian language, despite that time of oppression. Maybe even if it takes us a little bit away from the focus on the history, how is that situation now? Maybe because it's interesting to many of our listeners.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, Istria is officially a bilingual region. So it's Italian and Croatian, and if you go around through the towns, you will see the street names in both languages. Also in the city where I live, in Pula, you have streets named with names of Italians, Italian people living here before the Second World War. So it's well, we always try to have this balance of cultures, but it's not always very easy, especially during the 90s and afterwards, where the nationalism started to grow. So it's always in danger, this kind of multicultural living. But for example, all the main towns where there is more Italian people, they have their communities. They call Italian communities, so cultural centers of Italians, and so yeah. And of course, if you go to a town like Rovinj, you see it's a very it looks like Venice. So there is a lot of Italian culture, but also maybe it's interesting to know that before that time of World War II, or before that, or before the nationalism started, the people mixed, and no one knew who they were, if they were Italian or Croatian. I think just the language was the difference. So there was a lot of interesting things happening. For example, because also the difference here in Istria in history was that all the Slavic people were in the village, and in the town were Italians.
Okay.
So, for example, if a villager earned some money and transferred his family to a city. They started to speak Italian, and they changed the name in Italian. And for example, now we have families with the very specific last names, which are a mix of Slavic and Italian. So it's a complicated story, which we tend to simplify now, because now we have Italian. We know now who is Italian, who is Croatian, but before that it was not so important.
That's so interesting. Wow. So I immediately imagine a good pizza, but with another topping. Then is that how you do it from culture eating? Or
well, it depends. We have Istrian style of pizza, which is with the local prosciutto, sausages, and I don't know, some other things which are typical. For example, the truffle mushroom, which is very known here in Istria.
and what's the nearest airport? Because I like the sound of that.
The nearest airport, Pula.
Okay.
We have an international airport in Pula,
Okay.
which in winter is really closed. So, there is more training of pilots than really lines that goes anywhere. But in summer, it's very, very alive.
Okay, good to know. Well, it's so interesting to know that Istria has such a rich background in and how you can handle the different cultures in the same location.
Yeah, and I think to connect with what Svenja was telling, I think when the Italian rulers, so when Istria became part of Italy in the 20s, it was was a big shock, because before that, really, even in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was a multi-ethnical empire, somehow this balance of nations, ethnicities, maybe not so successful, but it still worked somehow. When the Italians came, they tried to make just one nation and to wipe out everything else. And I think this is one big reason, maybe, why the resistance was so hard when the war started. Because here people were not fighting only against Nazism, fascism, but also to gain their national identity, let's say, like that.
Yeah, it's the same thing that we have seen in the region where I live in Flanders. You see that it has been the same background. There was a lot of polarization between the Dutch-speaking, French-speaking part of the country, and during the wartime, the same thing. Dutch-speaking, there was a movement trying to separate and become an independent country, to be honest. And you see that during wartime, it escalated firmly. So it's interesting to see that these things happen on so many different places.
Yeah. And it's interesting also because I was doing the research for my grandfather and my family, and you can find on the internet the official newspaper of the Italian kingdom from that time, and you can see a lot of these articles about Eastern families wanted to change their names to their Italian original forms. So, and then I found my family also there and saying, Josip Bancic and his family wanted to change their name to Banci, Giuseppe, and I don't know,
Yeah.
and so on. So it's very interesting how it was presented.
Yeah. Of course, I can imagine. Yeah, and then somehow, because he was in the Liberation Committee, and he actually got betrayed, as we've learned already. He ended up first in the camp of Dachau, and then he got transferred to Neuengamme, where also my great-grandfather was at the time. And then he went from Neuengamme to Spaldingstraße, and I think Anna already told us that it was mostly to clean up the damage from all the bombings. Maybe it's good to get back to that story again, because I think it's interesting to know a bit more about Spaldingstraße. What was the day-to-day operations there? What was the health conditions, that kind of stuff? Maybe Anna, can you deepen that out for us?
Of course. Well, the daily lives were more or less, so to speak, a standardized procedure in concentration camps. People would get up with sunrise, or here in the north, way before sunrise, and the survivors told us it was more or less day was between sunrise and sunset, so they would be working really all day long. Their day would start with half an hour that they had to get ready for work. Then they would get counted. They would have a roll call. And in Spaldingstraße, because it was part of a large complex that was bombed out, but there was like a courtyard where they could actually carry out these roll calls, these procedures where people had to line up in order to be counted. And then they would be divided into different work details, and they would be marched off to work. Because, of course, not all the prisoners worked together in one detail. As I mentioned, there were various also locations where they needed to, do this, perform this kind of work that I described so far. So this was basically, the departure of the details, and then they would be working all day, and then in the evening they would come back and they would be counted again before going to sleep or being sent to bed. And on some details, there was no food whatsoever during these working hours. And Spaldingstraße was, as I already mentioned briefly earlier, it was really extreme because it had the highest death rate of all Neuengamme satellite camps, because in these 5 months of the camp's existence, 800 out of 2,000 prisoners died.
Wow.
So it was a really, really extremely high death rate. And on the one hand, for sure, one thing that played a huge role is the fact that the camp existed only in winter. And the winter, of course, is the most difficult time to be working outside. And, these people did not have any proper clothes, any protection, anything. They were just given whatever, there was. And so on the one hand, there was that. Then you had a horrible, strenuous physical labor. You had complete lack of food, complete, disastrous, lethal living and working conditions, lethal sanitary conditions, which all sort of caused these number of deaths to skyrocket.
And in such a short existence, indeed, because it was only a few months then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they had to work, actually, basically, if I understand, in the streets just to clean up stuff and fix railroads. And then they would just sleep in the building that is currently a hostel, where you can still sleep.
Yeah, now it is a hostel. Back then it was also damaged, but it was still standing, and it was very convenient for the SS to establish a concentration camp in this building because, as I said, it was a restricted area. You only had access to the building from one side, so it was really easy to guard it. Mm-hmm. There was a canal on the back side. It's like a natural sort of fence. The people could not really escape in any way. There was no way out. And yeah, they had to work. And also, except for, clearing rubble, I also mentioned it earlier, they had to, for example, defuse unexploded bombs.
Okay.
And, prisoners who were not skilled in this whatsoever, and they were not even really, they were just sent to a certain location and told to start working. And, one wrong movement with a shovel could, get the thing to explode. So it was really, really dangerous. And prisoners call these extremely dangerous work details Himmelfahrtkommandos, which basically is like suicide mission, more or less. They were used as a cannon fodder, so.
Okay, and how does one get assigned to Spaldingstraße? I presume that you're first in the main camp of Neuengamme. How do you get in Spaldingstraße then?
Well, there were different details. I'm not sure if all the people always went to Neuengamme.
Okay.
I think they were also simply taken to the places where they needed to work, because Neuengamme, the main camp now, when I say Neuengamme, I mean the main camp.
Yeah.
It was also, especially in this time, like late 44, early 45, was absolutely overcrowded.
Mm-hmm.
And, people were needed actually somewhere else. They were not needed in the main camp. So they were just taken there where they were supposed to be. And how well, I mean, as most things at that time, this was done really arbitrarily.
Yeah.
There was a group of prisoners and there's a Spaldingstraße established and we need to clear the city, so off with them, sort of there.
Yeah. Okay.
And when that one is full, then we send them somewhere else. I mean, this was all, as it is really interesting, because on the one hand, it was so meticulously documented, and on the other, it was a complete arbitrary mess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And if we talk about meticulous documentation, I'm immediately thinking about Francie again with the archives, because you've already shown us a bit about some archive work that you've found on Spaldingstraße. Is there anything else available?
There is. We have like a whole wall in the archive is just built for folders where we collect everything about the different satellite camps or subcamps. So we have one folder in particular for Spaldingstraße. All these folders are very diverse. They were kind of used to do our exhibitions and to just thematically collect what we have. So there are copies from different sources that we have on different places in the archive as well. For example, we have the archive of Hans Schwarz, who was a former prisoner and who started to collect everything he could after his liberation. So we've got a whole wall for his documents as well, and the correspondence that he had with other survivors, where they talked about Spaldingstraße, for example, and where they sent each other drafts of maps from the different subcamps and stuff like that. So we have that like at two different places, one in the folder that is for Spaldingstraße and one at the Hans Schwarz archive, just to give you a rough imagination of how well organized and tidy we sometimes are. Well, it's fine. And we also collect, like, if there's a book written about Spaldingstraße, there are some books. I think we can give them in the show notes. Then we have some copies from them in these folders. Or we have, what I find interesting, and maybe you can correct me there as being Spaldingstraße experts, we also have some documents there, correspondence from the cemetery of Ohlsdorf with the camp of Neuengamme, talking about that some of these prisoners were also used to bury the dead bodies of the victims from Hamburg, and that they had to be given extra rations of cigarettes and alcohol to do the work, because they were working with bodies that have swum in the river Elbe for some time and stuff like that. So horrible work, really horrible work. So this is like the one particular folder we have about Spaldingstraße. But we also, of course, collect a lot of testimonies and interviews from survivors. And for Spaldingstraße, we have around 40 written testimonies.
Okay.
So stuff like that.
On 2,000 people, that's, I think, still a lot of information then.
It is.
And is there something that comes to mind or that pops out that you found that's like, this is worth mentioning?
Do you mean about testimonies now?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Well, there's one in particular that just, I was going through these and this one just popped in my mind because it had the wonderful headline of Christmas at Spaldingstraße. And it was written by a Danish prisoner. His name was Kai Dahl. And yeah, I do not know. Do you want me to like read it? It's like one page. Or should we just put that in the show notes?
Well,
as
tell
well?
us what it's about, and then we can indeed add it to the show note because I think people will want to read it too.
I think that's better. Well, it's really, I think it's, first of all, it's very nice written, I think. And he just describes how they were in between this very thin line of not trying to not give up hope and still seeing how everybody around them suffered and trying to accept that they are in the courtyard of death, so to speak, trying to accept that they are in this situation and they probably won't make it out alive. And then he just describes a few years later how unreal this Christmas was at 1944 at Spaldingstraße when they had like a very poor Christmas tree, but they had a Christmas tree that says, with like a cardboard that said Merry Christmas. And he mentioned a pea soup where the peas has been forgotten. I think that's how he wrote it. And how even at Christmas the people died, but they were singing and all the nations were singing, and even the, I think he talks about the Soviet prisoners that were singing the loudest, and trying to, keep up your hope with this mixed feeling and emotion of still being so close to death. And that was very well described, and I really like that. I like it because it's so unreal, but you can feel his emotion so good.
Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps just you talking about it. It's wow. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, me too. It's one of the things that fascinates me most by working in an archive. You just stumble over documents like that, and they just hit you, and you're like, okay, yeah, well, I'm doing this every day now, and it's getting like a regular job to research people that are dead, but they just get so emotional and personal just out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that we keep telling these stories, and like the story of Josip, your grandfather Alexander, was he still alive in Christmas of 44?
No. No, he died. He died on December 10 of 44.
Okay.
So he was very. It was a short time in Spaldingstraße, really.
Okay, and do you because I think we've all here done a lot of research to in regards to our family members and what happened to them, and I'm just wondering about your story. How did you get to know about your grandfather and what happened, and how did you get in touch with his story?
In the family we didn't talk about a lot about him, so his story was not known to the members of the family. I think my grandmother didn't have any news until the early 50s.
Wow.
I think it was, as my father says, that I think they transferred the remains from one cemetery to another, or maybe it was because now he's in the Italian memorial cemetery. So I think it was the time when it was done, the memorial cemetery. So I think the process was that my grandmother should she received some documents
Mhm.
from Germany, and it's an interesting story, because when the news came that something came from Germany about my grandfather, all the family thought that he's returning.
Oh my
That
God.
maybe he's returning, that he's alive. So it was after so many years, but the hope was still there. But no, it was just the documents about his death and his the transferring of the remains.
So they didn't
Uh,
know for 5-6 years what happened
yeah,
to you.
they were still hoping that, you know, he's somewhere, he will come. Probably they also thought, okay, he's dead.
Mhm.
But when these documents came, it sparked again the hope that maybe he's alive and returning.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Ma-
Francie.
Maybe I can just add, because I have the documents from the cemetery with me, I can just add the date his remains were transferred in July 1947. So maybe that fits the date you are referring to. Does it?
Maybe
Maybe.
it is. I don't know. I don't know really the date, the year. It was just what my father was telling me, that there was this time when something came to it didn't came even to the address, the home address, but it came to the local government.
Okay.
So they
Mm.
called my grandmother to come to see these documents. So it was all very, not clear what's happening.
Mhm.
So
Um,
cruel. I'm sorry, I'm
yeah,
shocked.
yeah, it is. And afterwards, I was very small when my grandmother died. She died in 1980, I think. I was 6 years old, so I didn't have the possibility to talk with her
Mhm.
about my grandfather. So everything I knew was from my father, and he knew anything really. He didn't even know in which camp he ended, um, and the date of his death, and so we didn't really know anything. And I started to research very late.
Mhm.
Uh, I was already maybe in my 30s, and really I found the information in some books, Italian books,
Okay.
because the Italians were so much organized, um, and they wrote a lot, and they collected a lot of information about people missing, because they were talking about missing people, because the family didn't know where these people ended. So there are organizations also in Italy about that. Unfortunately, as my grandfather was an Italian citizen when he died. I think the Yugoslavian and Croatian part, they didn't really, you know, he didn't matter to them. So
Yeah.
I think this is also why there is a gap of information.
Okay. Yeah. True. And so
Yeah.
you started doing the research in books, and then you found more information about him.
Yeah. I found where all the how to say the path that is from Trieste to Dachau, and his prisoner number, and from Dachau to Neuengamme, and where his remains are.
Yeah.
I found this short information, and then um, I asked the Arolsen office to find something more. So they send me also the transport lists and the death certificates and everything that they have.
Okay, yeah, indeed. The Arlson archive is a very interesting archive to get in touch with if you're doing your own research about your family member, or if you're a descendant. It's very interesting to get in touch to, because I think they have a very large digitalized database already where you can do lookups by yourself. But what fewer people know is that you can also get in touch with them and ask for more information about specific people, and it will take a bit more time, but you will get a lot of interesting info. And I think, Francie, are you guys working together with them as well from the archive of Neuengamme?
Well, from time to time, sometimes they email us if we have more information. And of course, we always, whenever someone gets an archive request to us and we answer it, we also suggest to them to get in touch with the Arolsen archives, because they just have such a large collection. I think it's one of the largest collections about this whole topic, not just concentration camp inmates, but also forced laborers, which are very hard to find documents about.
Yeah.
So yeah, they are heroes and should be contacted whenever you look for something about your family.
Certainly worthy of adding all the information about the different archives in the show notes. So if I want to get more info about my family member and he or she was in Neuengamme, then it's good to contact Francie, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I can't promise that it will always be me to answer, because sometimes, I've got 2 students also to help me do it. And but yeah, we always love to get archive requests and get in touch with other descendants, because we try to collect everything we could about former inmates.
Yeah, that's so cool what you're doing in the archive work. I find it astonishing. I've been visiting it many times, but actually I'm curious how many requests you get on a yearly basis in Neuengamme.
Wonderful. It really depends. And I'm ashamed I haven't counted them on a yearly basis. I can say that we get around, let's say, 1 or 2 every day, which does not sound much, but it adds up.
Yeah, that's 400, 500 per year if you would count it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even more. I mean, some of these requests are like concerning more than one people. For example, when you send me a request, I have to research about 30 people.
Correct.
In one request. Yeah. But so it really depends. And when there are documentaries or specific dates approaching, we see the requests rising up. For example, around the 27th of January, the weekend after that, we suddenly had 20 requests more on Monday.
Wow.
And we were all like, where's that coming from? But yeah, of course, everybody watched some documentaries about the Holocaust and then starts to remember, I have a family history. Maybe I should contact the archive. Mm-hmm. And what I really like is they always ask about, can you give me the folder of? And I'm like, yeah, no, but I will ask my database.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's around it, I guess.
Okay, and the archive itself, it is in the memorial of Neuengamme, where the camp used to be, right?
Yes, it is one of the larger buildings that have been built by the prisoners and where the prisoners lived and died. And yeah, it's a nice place to work in, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It does not sound
visited
like that when
many
you see it
times as
from
well.
that perspective, but it is.
Yeah, and can one visit it just, or should you make an appointment, or is it best to do it digitally?
Oh, it depends. I mean, I like to have appointments, but if you are a visitor and you just want to see what we have, you can just tell one of our staff and they will phone me and say, are you available quite right now? Do you have time? And most of the time I say, yes, give me the name and give them 50 minutes to wait so I can look everything up, and then they come in and I will do a short presentation and get them copies of the documents and stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to research a specific topic, please get in contact before that and make an appointment. But if you're just like a descendant and want to find out more, then you can just come by.
Okay, so good to know. And so you did research about Josip, the grandfather of Alexander, as well. I'm interested, actually, Alexander, how, because you did the research in the books first, did you go a step further? Did you visit Neuengamme or Dachau or Spaldingstraße?
Yeah, I think it was in 2003. I made an international theater project with some colleagues from Berlin, and then I just took some time off afterwards and went to Hamburg.
Okay.
I had 2 days, so I didn't visit the memorial site. But I visited the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to find my grandfather, and also had the possibility to see Spaldingstraße.
Okay.
Also,
How was that
but at that
experience?
time, I think there was no hostel.
Okay.
And I had a room in a hotel in the street, but down the street from the place. And I had this possibility, but it was too short to really investigate more on the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was the experience to be there in the same street where your grandfather used to be?
It was strange. It was strange because I was walking the streets of Hamburg to imagine what he was seeing. Trying to imagine Hamburg without all these new buildings and how it looked like at that time. And I was trying to imagine what he felt, how he felt coming there.
Yeah. Because indeed he didn't survive, and your grandmother died when you were still at a young age. So most of the information you've received from your father. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And all the information I got was really, black and white, just information. And what I missed was really, the feelings, also the character of my grandfather. I didn't know him. Even my father, he didn't knew him, because my father was born in January, so a month after the death of his father.
Okay, so your grandmother was pregnant with your
father
when your grandfather was taken away.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's also an episode. So when my grandfather was taken from the town where they lived, to a town 20 kilometers away. My grandmother, pregnant, went to visit him by foot.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was the last time she saw him. But this is all information that I got afterwards.
Yeah.
So visiting Hamburg really gave me this input to try to find out who he was and, you know, his character. So I interviewed my aunt. She's older than my father, so I asked her to tell me something about my grandfather.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that gave me a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And at the time when you visited Spaldingstraße, did you found more information there? Was there already? Is there an exhibition today at Spaldingstraße? Can you visit it? Because a lot of subcamps, they have museums now where you can have a lot of more information. Is it present today? Anna, do you know that?
Yeah. Yes, there is a really tiny exhibition at the hostel. So you can walk in and take a look. I think it's 4 panels offering information on the camp. So it was, once it became a hostel, when these people purchased the building, they decided to document the history and put it on display for their guests and for the public. So it's not a part of the main exhibition, really, or it doesn't have like a proper memorial, but a small, tiny exhibition about the camp exists.
Okay, and was it already there when you visited, Alexander?
No.
Okay.
No, when I was there, it was just plaque, or I would say is the sign, the memorial sign on the building.
Okay.
But you could not enter the building.
No. Okay, and today you can book a night at the hostel and stay and look at the panels, or can you just walk in and have a look as well? And do you plan on doing it sometime, Alexander?
Hopefully, maybe this May.
Will you come to Hamburg in May as well?
Yeah. I'm planning to finally.
Okay. Yeah.
Is your father also coming with you?
Probably not. He's 70 something. Yeah, and he's also very afraid, with this pandemic situation. It's still. Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, for those who are listening, of course, by May we mean the large commemoration that is going on in Neuengamme to commemorate not the liberation, but the end of the camps, of course, which will take place always at the beginning of May. And it should have been already 2 years ago that we would have a larger commemoration to remember the 75th anniversary, but due to COVID, of course, it didn't happen. So I think this is the second or the third time that we're going to try to meet and get everybody back together. So I'm traveling to Hamburg as well in May, so I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody again. And I think I'm really looking forward to meeting you in real life, Alexander, as well.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so nice. So is it correct if I say that it had an impact on your life? The story about your grandfather?
Yeah, a lot. Because I felt a gap, a generational gap. And when we were in Yugoslavia, we always were listening about the Second World War, the partisans, the heroes, and from time to time I heard from my family like, oh yes, our grandfather was a fighter for liberation, but nothing else. And then from the 19s, where to be a partisan was not so cool anymore.
Okay.
From that time, it was like, well, yes, but he was forced. So the story changed.
And how is
He
that?
was,
Because that's very particular.
yeah, because the ideology of the state changed. So the story changed from being heroes to being, bandits or something like that. Or okay, they were heroes, but we are not talking about it. So the story of my grandfather changed from being a hero and dying for liberty to being forced to fight for liberty.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a big
because
turnaround. Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't want to accept that. I wanted to research. Yeah, but
And
also, I have 2 pictures of him, 2 photos, and I tried really to connect to see what I have, what I inherited from this person. What is different, and so I really wanted to connect. I really felt this gap, this hole that just was missing from my life.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see it in our family. It's the same thing. My grandmother, she grew up without her father, and you see that it has an impact on your life. You see the first time I got to Neuengamme, I was 11 years old, together with my grandmother, visiting the grave of where my great grandfather passed away, and that makes a mark in it. I think it does change. Like, well, the fact that we're all here today talking about it and taking our time to invest in it, I think makes the point exactly. Do you think it had an influence in your daily life as well as a drama teacher and a storyteller?
Probably, yeah, probably. Not having him in my life, and also not having the story of his life in my life, made me connect to his father, so my grandfather. Because at that time when I was researching my grandfather, I got some stories that my grandfather used to tell the children from his village and other people. And this was a kind of me connecting with this older generation. And of course, the first idea that came to my mind was, okay, I, as a theater maker, I want to put on stage these stories.
Okay.
So I made a performance of
Oh wow.
the stories of my grandfather, and there are funny stories, the scary stories,
Yeah.
of the villagers going drunk from the from um, the uh, the name Ana Gostionica, kako se kaže Gostionica?
Like an inn, like
Yeah.
a pub, local pub.
Yeah,
Okay,
from local
like-
pub.
okay.
Yeah, so villagers going drunk from local pubs and seeing all kind of stuff in the branches of the trees, and so my grandfather talking, telling these stories to kids to scare them a little bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, and this is a kind of part of our heritage, cultural heritage here in Istria. You know, we are proud of these stories of vampires, of werewolves, and so on. So it's interesting, yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, it's so cool that you created a theater about your history. That's I think one of the dreams that Svenja has been talking about as well, right?
Yes, I actually at some point talked to Alexander in an email about this, how good it would be to have some kind of stage performance about the perspective of descendants. And Alexander immediately knew a professional term for this, a documentary play.
Okay.
And that's still something I think the young committee should focus on. And then you, Alexander, also said, well, storytelling is actually maybe also a very good form of sharing the stories of prisoners, especially from your area. And I think that's also a very, very interesting way of thinking of how to share these stories. And
I'm a professional storyteller, and I started a project with currently I'm doing Istrian folk tales, but it's a project that I want to continue in the next years with other topics. So when I was also thinking about my grandfather and his story and how it is important that someone is telling his story, I was thinking really maybe as a part of this project, to make a storytelling event with stories of people died or not, or survivors of concentration camps, which is something very different from folk tales. But I think storytelling can also be a good tool to transfer these stories to the next generations.
Oh wow! You should teach us. As you're a professional storyteller, that's so cool. Okay, I would love the idea of doing something like that, and maybe the perfect time will be in 2 years, when it is 80 years after everything that happened. That would become very relevant. Or is it 3 years? I don't know by heart. 3 years, yes, indeed. I always say 2 years because for me personally, of course, in my village, the stuff mostly happened in August 1944. So when I talk about the remembrance, I always look at the 4 years. But of course, in Neuengamme, it was already the year after that in 45. All right, wow. It was wonderful hearing the story of you, Alexander, and having you here in our podcast. And I think we're already coming to the end of the very first edition of our Neuengamme Generations podcast. I think I can honestly say, for me, it has been a wonderful experience having all of us together and talking about Spaldingstraße as the first satellite camp that hopefully in a series of many more to discuss. I think, if we have any stuff that we are forgetting or wanting to add, now is the time. But I propose that people will have a look at the show notes as well. We will add a bunch of stuff for information, maybe more about the personal story of Josip, about Istria, about Spaldingstraße itself, the link to the hostel that you can visit the panels. It was wonderful having everybody here today, and then I would like to thank you all. So thank you, especially, of course, Alexander, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you, Anna, for giving all the wonderful insights what you know about Spaldingstraße.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, and then Francie for giving us a glimpse of how the wonderful archives work. I'm sure you will get a lot of requests in the coming weeks.
I just hope so. And I'm looking forward to do this again.
All right, and
It
then
was fun.
cool. And then of course Svenja, thank you for being here, our wonderful president, and giving us the idea of doing all this. So and of course from myself, it was wonderful to be here as well. So I guess this means goodbye.
Thank you, Tom, to you for being a wonderful facilitator of this conversation and doing all the work behind the scenes to get us recorded.
Well, it's nice to be part of something like this. So wonderful. Okay, and maybe we will meet each other physically in May. Of course, we kindly invite all our listeners to be present there as well, and perhaps on a Next Generations meetup, or what might be the second series of the Neuengamme Generations podcast. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.